when we were working on Rasa NLU, or what became Rasa NLU, the internal name for this was Parsa, so parsing text. And when we thought about like, oh, we should really open sources, we felt like Parsa is kind of a weird name. And so we were looking for like alternatives, and then ended up seeing that Rasa.ai was available as a domain. And that just sounded like a cool name to have.
Welcome to the Co-Learning Launch podcast. This is the first episode of the Rasa podcast series. Rasa supplies the standard infrastructure for conversational AI, providing the tools required to build better, more resilient contextual assistants. With more than 3 million downloads since launch, Rasa Open Source is loved by developers worldwide, with a friendly, fast-growing community learning from each other and working together to make a better text and voice-based AI assistant. Hey, if you're new to this channel, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And if you liked some part of the podcast, please don't forget to mention it in the comment section below. Today we have with us the co-founder and CEO of Rasa, Alex. Today's podcast will go through the origin story of Rasa and look at some of the decisions Alex and his team made to build a strong community-driven product company. We also get an overview of how Rasa evolved from Alex's kitchen until today, along with the first-hand experience from Alex about the recent Series B funding. Just so that you know, the same investor also invested in technologies such as Facebook, Pinterest, Slack, Skype, and a long list of other companies. And we'll be touching upon many topics from a view of the founder of Rasa, Alex. So let's explore the origins of Rasa. Let's welcome Alex, who is the co-founder and CEO of Rasa. Alex likes to float on the beach, eat salads, and loves coffee that goes along with communities. Namaste, Alex. Welcome to the CLL podcast.
Namaste, Kunal.
How have you been?
Hey, I'm super well. Thanks, Kunal. I'm really excited to be here with you and chat about Rasa, open source, and the community.
So, Alex, I've always been fascinated with how a day looks like for a super cool tech founder like you. Can you tell us something about your daily routines? What do you follow, and how do you give yourself breaks between hectic days?
Sure. For me, it really depends where I am, because I spend my time between San Francisco and Berlin. And when I'm in San Francisco, my day usually starts very early because you're like 9 hours behind Europe. And so that usually means like getting up early and then going for a run to just kind of free my mind a little bit. And then I usually start working very early, like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. Pacific time. And when I'm in Berlin, it's a little different. And so there, of course, it's not that I'm 9 hours behind, which is actually a good way to start a day. So I usually also go for a run, and then I meditate, and then I spend some time reading, so like non-work related things. And then I usually start my day later at like 10 or 11 a.m. Berlin time. So I have more overlap with our Pacific time team. So that's normally how it is during the week. And then I try to, on weekends, get out of the cities and go hiking or do something in nature to really just switch off my brain.
Absolutely. So even I do a run and a meditate schedule every day myself. Do you see a difference between the days that you don't run, your productivity dips or increases, when you're running?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's definitely something that I notice. I mean, I will say that I've done that like running in the morning routine now for maybe almost like 5 years or so. And I mean, some days I've not done it, and it's definitely something that I think harder to focus for me if I don't exercise in the morning. And even like if I go like travel for work, I always take my running shoes and go for a run. It's also something you can do in every part of the world, right? Which is something that I really like.
No barriers actually. You got to do it. You got to do it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Rasa's origin story. We know that you and Alan met in UK at a startup weekend, and out of boredom from educational degrees started a company called Treve. Just for the audience, Treve was launched in April 2015. Treve is a search platform for all your online drives such as Google Docs, Dropbox, Trello, and more. Also, it was well received, fifth trending product of the day on Product Hunt. So Alex, can you tell us about the parameters you used to decide to close the company, and how you learned how not to make a product and how it led to the formation of Rasa?
Sure. So, I mean, the facts that you mentioned about Treve are really the like highlights, I guess. The story of Treve for us includes like just a lot of things that haven't worked. And I think for us, like Alan and me as the founding team, the biggest insight was that although it sounded like a good idea in theory, in the end, the usage wasn't really as good and like as often specifically and regularly as we wish it would have been. And I think that was like a major insight for us in the end around, although something can sound like a good idea, that might not mean that people use it and really solves, like, as some people say, like a hair on fire problem. The way how we kind of got to that conclusion for us was really through just a lot of iterations and like being really strict about like what means product market fit for us and like how we would define a successful product. And one key piece of what we've been building back in the days, it was like a freemium product. And so one key piece for us was retention. So we wanted to make sure that people not only like initially excited about the product, but they actually keep on using that search bar that we built throughout their work days and are really just like constantly using it, because otherwise you will have a hard time later on to monetize something like that. And so that never really happened. So we had, I think, 5,000 users or so in the end, and maybe 10 people that were using it like every day a lot, right? And so when we looked at those people, we realized that it's not really a big segment. So it's not that there are like 10 million of these people and we just need to find them. It just happened to be people that had just like very specific workflows, I guess. And for them, Treef worked really well, but for most
Okay.
other people, it didn't. And that's also why we decided in the end to shut down Treef as a product. And then we can talk a bit more about how we got into conversational AI.
Awesome. So obviously, when you're building a product, tracking the usage is one of the biggest part of it. With any product that you're building now, you have a stronger analytics background where you track the usage very actively. Is that how you're doing it?
That's a really good point, actually. So I think that's one of the challenges of building an open source product, because in like Rasa open source specifically, there's no tracking whatsoever, right? And I think that's something that also the community appreciates a lot. But you're somehow stabbing in the dark in many ways, right? But then there are, of course, other ways to look at product market fit. And so for us, the way how we think about product market fit nowadays is we call it like magical despite moments. And so
Yep.
the idea is pretty much that you think about something happening despite your company being really small, or like despite your company having only 2 people, and like despite nobody has ever heard about you, but
Mm-hmm.
people start adopting your product. And when we look at Rasa open source specifically, those despite moments have been there from the earliest days. Just to give you one example, so Rasa NLU was the first product that we launched in December 2016. And even before we announced it and launched it, we already had somebody contributing to the open source and making a pull request on the GitHub repo.
Okay.
And so that was for us like, holy shit, how did this person even find us? And so somehow this person found us on GitHub, and they were looking for like an NLU engine open source. And I think just the fact that this happened is just, I mean, and of course you can't build a company only on this one moment, right? So there were more moments like that, but that's
Mhm.
just an example of what we mean with a despite moment.
Correct.
And I think we've just seen a lot of those for Rasa open source, and we haven't seen any of those for Treef.
Oh,
um,
interesting to hear. I think so. They got a lot of eyeballs to that product immediately. Also, now to a follow-up questions on like once you launched Rasa, right? Like the things that you did was hiring a first member of a company, right? So what does that look like? What was the value that you're supposed to build add to the company when you're first starting your journey?
For us, it was really all very organically Rasa. And so when we launched Rasa open source, maybe a bit of backstory, how we then even got into conversational AI. So like Treef, this like search engine that we just talked about, the idea for that for us was always to turn that into some form of like assistant that you can chat to. And it's really more about like, I don't know, asking questions like, where did Kunal put the pitch deck of Rasa or something like that, right? So that type of questions we thought would be cool to build. But then when we shut down Treef, we of course didn't follow on and didn't work on this anymore. But we got really excited by Slack opening up their platform for developers to build chatbots. And that was really like the starting point for our journey in conversational AI. And then the like very condensed short version of this is that we tried to build our own chatbot. We used like tons of the tools that were in the market back then, like Wit.ai and like Dialogflow, etc. And all of them didn't really work for us, and they all had like limitations. And then we started building our own tooling, which then led us to build Rasa open source and like the framework that we are still until today pushing forward. And I think for us, what we found really quickly was that a lot of companies were interested in conversational AI, but they didn't really know how to do it. And so in the early days of Rasa, we actually did a lot of consulting projects with big companies. And so the first hires, to answer your question, were really people that could help us like implement these projects. So like back in the days, we had Tom, who started helping us out building projects for big companies in the early days. And he was like back then still working for his own company. That he co-founded an agency, and he started working part-time for us, and then over time started working full-time for us. And now Tom is our like director of engineering. So he's been one of the first people that joined. And then we also needed somebody helping us out with like project management. And so we had actually Philip, who back in the days, he just finished his master's degree. And I still remember like he called me because we were friends, or we're still friends, but back at the time, and he was saying like, what should I do after my master's degree? And then I was like, I have an idea for you.
Yeah.
And then I said, we're looking for somebody helping us out with these projects. And so Philip started joining part-time, and now he runs our business development function. And then, just other people that we kind of knew joined over time. I think when we were 10 people or so, we also realized that we really want to have somebody dedicating their time full-time on the community and like all the work that we're doing with contributors. And so helping those people contribute more, but at the same time also just creating more educational content for developers. And it's really when we started looking for like a developer advocate, and then found Justina, who has been part of our community. She's been a contributor before. She did like this amazing like 2-hour video on how to build an assistant with Rasa, and we've just been really blown away by like how well it was done, and like thought that Just is like a great fit for this role. And that was like 2 years ago, and then she joined, and we've been just like blown away by the work that she's been doing. And she now started building out a team as well of developer advocates and leading that effort. So those are like 3 examples of people that joined early.
Awesome to hear, some of the new folks join in and then growing with the company. Even I'm a educational content maker, and there's a lot of importance to bring the content in different ways so that you have a larger adoption by communities when they know, we could use this product in this way and in that way. And I think since you're a community focused person, you see that, this was adding a lot of value, and hence you bet on that early on. When you built your first bot, that is the data bot in 2016, you used Slack and Facebook, the APIs, and obviously Wit.ai. Then you switched to building a wrapper around Spacey, and just so that audience knows, Spacey is an open source software library for advanced natural language processing written in programming language Python and Cython. Now, what are the biggest challenges conversational AI is facing currently? What do you expect from the open source NLP AI community, Spacey or Hugging Space, to uplift the overall chatbot ecosystem?
Yeah, great question. And I think a lot of stuff has happened ever since, right? So since like 3.5 years ago, since we first open sourced Rasa NLU, of course, like especially like NLP research has been going really strong. And I mean, as you guys might know, we're also doing a lot on our end on that side with this whole idea of like bridging really the gap between like the latest and greatest research and production, and like what developers can actually use and make sense. I mean, I think the earliest days of Rasa were all about this realization that as much as like NLP is important for conversational AI and is like one of the key pieces, it's really not just all about NLP. And so when we think about conversational AI, there are a bunch of like, I think, components for us in all of that. But in addition to like understanding what somebody said, which is all about like NLP, it's of course also all about handling more like complex and like complicated dialogues. And that's just something that we've early on as developers realized is extremely hard to build. So it's not just about understanding what somebody said, but it's also like, what do you respond to that, right? And I think that what do you respond to that part can also be like split up in like really the dialogue logic and like what you decide happens next, and then what exactly you're going to say. And I think all of those parts are like constantly developing and evolving, and our like goal is really to make sure that Rasa open source is always cutting edge and like allows developers to use the most state of the art components. And I think like in this whole space of NLP, a big topic, of course, in the last couple of weeks have been all about like GPT-3 and all the great work that OpenAI has done there around like specifically language generation. And that's, of course, also like an interesting component, right? So I guess I will say like lots of stuff happening, especially on the like library level, on like Spacey. I mean, you mentioned Hugging Face with Transformers. There's also Flare, which is a really amazing open source NLP project. So there's so many things happening, and we see those folks really as like innovating as on like one part of the stack, right? And for us, we really innovate on other parts, right? Which are, for example, around dialogue management. And then we, of course, have our own like NLU components. I'm not sure if you guys followed the developments around Diet and the new classifier that we built there. And so I guess it's constantly moving field, and this is just really exciting to be part of it at the moment.
Absolutely. Even I was just going through some of these GPT-3 articles, and interestingly, they are even generating SQL codes and generating codes overall altogether. And interesting to see that we've come up with that classifier, which is again a great addition to the whole ecosystem. So Rasa got immediate traction on TechCrunch post launch in December 2016, and I'm sure you're monitoring the first few users of 100 users closely. What are the biggest learnings that you got from these first early adopters? Now that is a big part of Rasa.
One of the big things that we saw early on was that Rasa NLU was used in like very large companies, actually. So one of the first like emails we received was from one of the largest banks in the world saying that they have deployed Rasa NLU in production. And I think that's something that we've continued to see a lot, right? We've continued to see that large companies are very interested in the topic, but at the same time, I think struggle with how to operationalize it. And so with that, I mean, like, what tools do you need to like not just like explore something, but also actually like create a whole process around, like in our case, like building an AI assistant with a team. And that's something that informed a lot of our product work and product decisions, specifically around like Rasa X, which is this like tooling layer on top of Rasa open source, where we see that it's being used by teams. And I think those teams have like all workflows around that topic. And so from the earliest days, there were lots of open source projects as well that provided like some of those workflows. For example, like labeling training data, there were a lot of, or still are, lots of open source projects built on top of Rasa open source, which is really awesome. And I think what we've been seeing is that, especially in big companies, you want to make sure that these like workflows are all synced up in a nice way, and ideally don't involve like an Excel spreadsheet, which I think a lot of people still use for labeling training data. And that's something that I think, in addition to what I just said, that conversational AI is not just about NLP, and there are other components like dialogue management, as well as like all the like language generation parts. It's also all about like workflows, right? And so I think that's something that we've been seeing a lot, is that every company does it a little differently. And I think something that eventually will find a way into one method of doing things. And so our current thinking on that is actually something that we talked a lot about during developer conference L3 AI, but also Alan has been talking a lot about that. It's this idea of like conversation driven development. And the idea is really that you start with like an early prototype of an assistant, and then through real conversations, improve it and learn from that. And I think that's something that still a lot of teams are struggling with, like imagining how this all could work. So it's really early with that.
Awesome. Not only are you working on some of the latest stuff with it, but you're also looking at pushing the boundaries in some of the latest barriers that the industry is currently facing in terms of chatbots. So post the initial launch, we know you are funding yourself by providing chatbot services to companies, but later you stopped and focused on building the product company with a strong focus on community-driven contribution. How do you think the company and the community will benefit from this model?
It's a really good question. I think in the end, the way how the community benefits or has been benefited so far was that we've been able to just pull off a lot of things that we wouldn't have been able to do if we would have to focus on services revenue and working with customers, or like with services customers. And so if we look at that, right, if you think about like the Rasa Masterclass, for example, which is a huge project that we started last year in December, now it's almost like 100,000 views on YouTube. And that's something that I think we wouldn't have been able to pull off if we would have had to like focus on creating constant services revenue to finance us, right? And so that's one. I think the other big piece is all about like research, and specifically everything that we're doing around like machine learning research. I think that's something that is also harder to pull off if you have to focus on like day-to-day services projects. So in the end, and that's really also the reason why we decided to go that venture capital route, was that when we looked at what we are doing, and when we looked at our mission of like pretty much enabling all makers in the world to build the best assistants, we felt that this all needs much, much better product, much, much better research, much better education and community to really get there. And we just didn't feel like we can do that as fast and like fast as it should be with financing us through like this kind of bootstrapping idea around services project, which is why we decided to raise a seed round in 2017, and since then have done follow-on financing rounds. And with that, I think the community really benefits from a better product and more education around it. which is something that I think at that scale wouldn't have been able to pull off for us.
Awesome. So, Alex, while you're mentioning that community driven and the education part of it, we have good listeners here today with us. So, what contribution do you think Rasa needs currently, not only in terms of the product development, but also in terms of educational videos? So, where do you see some gaps that you think the community can fill in both of these areas?
Yeah, so actually we like last year introduced this contributor project on GitHub, because what we noticed is that there were a lot of people really interested in like contributing back to the community, which is awesome. And a lot of people have done it already. I mean, we've over 450 contributors now globally, which is super cool. But what we noticed is that like either people tend to not know where to get started, and because there's, as your question just hints at, right? So it's like so many things to do. Where do I start and what is really needed? So that's one. And then on the other hand, we also have seen like people just duplicating content, which is not that they like copied content or so. It's more like they had the same problem like somebody else, but they couldn't find the solution to it. So they just wrote a blog post about it, for example, right? And so both of those problems we tried to solve through this contributor board, which is something that, I mean, if you can somehow would love for you to link to that in the podcast somehow, maybe in the notes. And this is really where like we have up-to-date information about like those are the things that are needed. So maybe just to give a quick overview on what are the things we think the community needs. So there are a bunch of different things. Like one is really all about like all organizing local meetup groups. So that's something that we've seen working really well in some countries, in some cities, and that's of course super exciting. We've seen a lot of amazing contributions around that in India, so that's really, really awesome. And that's like one kind of area, and depending on where you live, there might be either already a Rasa meetup or not. And so that's one. Then more around like specific educational content. I think what the community always appreciates is like more information on like more like the machine learning layer and the underlying layer on that. So that's something that is always really appreciated. And then of course more on the code contribution side, we also have a bunch of like open GitHub issues there. But in general, I think anything that you face as a challenge while developing a system, we would love for you to contribute back in some form. And I think the best way to figure that out and see if that fits into the product roadmap is always through opening a PR on the GitHub repo.
Absolutely. We'll definitely provide the links in the description section for anybody who's listening to this. You can go there and dive right into whatever Alex has mentioned in terms of contribution. And obviously with the community, we've seen Yogesh show his energy in terms of contribution in lot many ways. In fact, that's how when me and Yogesh actually met, trying to, contribute back to the community. And we've done some of the video programs on Rasa, and it was a good success for us working on that particular model. So obviously now October 2017, at that point of time, you had 30K downloads, over 300 members, as you mentioned, over 40 contributors and thousands of active developers. You open source Rasa core, and just within 7 months, you grew to over 100K downloads, over 1,000 members on GitHub, and over 100 contributors. How did you handle the pace at which the community was growing? Did it overwhelm you? Was this the time you hired more employees and grew significantly?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely really wild times in many ways. And I think like just on a lot of different levels, but it was really just like so much pull from the community. And so we ended up in that time raising the seed round. And with that money, we raised like around $1 million. And we were able to like hire more people that helped us on the product side, but also, as I mentioned earlier, on the like community building side with Justina, for example. And I think that time for us was all about just like keeping up and trying to make sure that people that are using Rasa are happy and we can fix bugs really quickly and all of that. And at the same time, also really like figuring out a way for us to like help teams even more, especially with like more tooling, because as I mentioned earlier, like we saw a lot of different tools popping up. And I think it's like super cool to see so many tools being developed in the community. But then we also saw that some patterns, like for example, if you think about like labeling training data, it's just something that everyone has to do. And we felt that it probably makes sense for us as a company to provide that in some form. So in 2018 or so, we started experimenting with like a tooling, which ended up like being Rasa X then in 2019. But yeah, lots of things happened, but mostly around like hiring and making sure that we can keep up with the pace.
Absolutely, Alex. And I remember 10 years back when I started doing some amount of NLP back in the days with Excel, labeling was a big thing, right? And it was definitely painful. I wish there were some tools that time to label it properly. So you mentioned about your Series A funding, which is roughly around April 2019. We got a funding of $13 million. And just for the audience, by this time, Rasa has over 500K downloads and over 3,500 members on forum and over 300 contributors. Now, I wanted to bring out an interesting aspect, which I've always wanted to know, is what goes on behind procuring this funding and how much of your bandwidth is occupied to bring all the aspects of whatever is needed to ensure you're procuring the funding. So what are the major learnings there just to ramp up the time between the funding you procured to just, let's say, a few months before that?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's probably like something where we can spend like a whole podcast episode on as well.
Yeah.
But I'll try to keep it short. I mean, the key to all of this is to have a product that people want. And
Yes.
I think if you have that, it's like I wouldn't say easy, but it definitely makes the whole thing much smoother. And I think in our case, we just had like really strong traction on the community side. So, I mean, the numbers that you just mentioned, but also in general, just I think the amount of like adoption that we've been seeing with Rasa has just been really phenomenal. And so that was something that we could just show and see, like, this is we built something that people want. Now let's just get more fuel kind of to grow faster. That was kind of the overall storyline. But also we've already been seeing like some financial traction as well around revenue. So we in like 2018 launched a super early version of an enterprise product, and we started selling that a bit. And with that got like some good revenue as well. And I think those two factors combined were like good arguments, I guess, for investors to consider giving us money. And I think if you don't have that, it's just really hard, right? I think it's just hard to convince anyone to put money in. In our case, what happened then a bit more specifically, I was back then still living in Berlin and was planning on going to the Bay Area to meet a bunch of investors. And so I had like in early January or mid-January or something like that, I had this 1 week where I had 20 meetings lined up or so with like investors.
Wow, wow, that is a lot.
And so it was kind of interesting because I didn't really plan to raise. So it was more like we wanted to get to know people, right? And I think that's something that I would always recommend is like building relationships early with investors. And so we were really just planning on like just meeting people and building relationships and then maybe raising in like 3 months or something like that. But then what happened is that people got so interested in what we are doing. I think it was just a good time. It was like early 2019. AI was like the cool thing, right? Everyone wanted to do an AI investment, and we looked like a good one, I think, around that time. And so we just got like what is called a term sheet very, very quickly in the process within a few days. And what that means is pretty much like a term sheet is like, here, I give you money, that amount of money for that valuation, and those are the terms. And so with that, I think we just created so much interest in Rasa that we got many, many more afterwards within a few weeks, and then ended up finishing this process really fast in like 2 or 3 weeks in total. And that's probably not normal in terms of how fast, but it's generally the process, right? I think you want to talk to like a lot of different people. Also, not so much to like, I mean, of course, to increase the chances of getting funding. But I think what's really always overseen is that in the end, it's like your decision who you work with. And so as much as you want to appeal to investors, I think it's much more important that they appeal to you and you have a good fit with them and they are aligned with what you want to build. And I think in our case, still in 2019, I think building a horizontal AI company, like horizontal as in all use cases, all like, industries, all geographies, was something that not many people believed is possible. So the bet at the time was all about verticalized AI solutions because people felt like, well, companies are not really able to hire all the talent to build their own AI. And I think that really changed dramatically. And I mean, we already saw it changing back in the days, but I think more and more people realize now that this is something possible to do.
Absolutely. And I've worked with some of the software engineering companies and I've seen a lot of teams try and fail and on this particular thing. Some of the things that they do is build up a stack of questions or questions and answers that can be used in the chatbot. That was the primary method. But, when you actually saw the technology, it was just a stack of questions. Moving forward, you also, secured a Series B funding for 26 million led by, again, Andreessen. And before the Series A was by Ackle, just so that the audience knows here. Ackle is the same company that funded Facebook, Flipkart, Slack, Spotify, etc., and all of that. And even in Series B, when we have Andreessen and Horowitz, They've also invested in Facebook, Pinterest, Slack, Skype, GitHub, Flutter, Instagram, and the list is going to be a long list for these people. So firstly, these people eyed on this, and the Series B process was much more faster, I assume. Now, when the Series B funding came in, what would these new investments and investors bring on the table for Rasa? So what does it mean for Rasa when these funding come?
Yeah, I mean, so in addition to the money, right? So in addition to the dollars, which we will pretty much mostly deploy on anything around like research and development. So we just opened a research hub in Edinburgh and hired Adam there from the university, who already joined the team July 1st. And like just investing even more in developer education. So like in addition to the dollars, the reason why we decided to work with Andreessen Horowitz was really twofold. Like I think one was that there was a strong belief in the mission that we have and like making conversational AI technology accessible to all developers, and this like really big focus on like community and educating developers around the world, and kind of agreement then that this is the right way to go. So that was something. It was the most important thing for us when we picked an investor. And then the other one is really more about the specific person that we work at Andreessen Horowitz with, which is Martin Casado. And Martin himself like has been a founder. He actually built an enterprise software company and sold that to VMware at some point in time, and then joined Andreessen Horowitz as a general partner. And Martin is just like a great human being, which is of course awesome. But also he has just seen a lot of other open source companies being built over time, and he's on the board of I think 6 open source companies or something like that. And I think with that, that will help us also just build an even better company.
Absolutely. All that experience definitely on the table. So obviously, speaking of community, when you have all of these things aligned, the strong community focus, I wanted to bring our attention to how you work to bring the whole community together, the developer community together with events like L3 AI. So how did you quickly adapt to going from a non-virtual event, which was almost going to get cancelled, and then move on to doing a virtual event because of the COVID situation? I'm sure you faced a lot of challenges trying to bring the community together there.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, internally, our marketing team has done a phenomenal job at managing this shift and doing things even better than I think we all could have ever hoped for. So a little bit of backstory. I mean, we last year in September had our first real developer conference in San Francisco with around like 250 people or something like that. It was really packed in a huge room in SF. It was amazing. And I think the energy there was just really incredible. And I also think that for the attendees, it was just a great day in many ways, right? I mean, it was just meeting other community members and then hearing their stories, like learning more about conversational AI. So I think that's been just like a huge success. And we've been thinking about how we can scale that even more. And so our original idea for this year was more to have like a bunch of those developer summits in different locations in the world. And then of course, COVID-19 started and we realized that this won't be possible this year. And then ended up thinking about how an online conference could look like. And what we really realized quickly was that it will be possible to first of all get even more amazing speakers because people don't have to travel, but also second of all, it will probably like attract more people all over the world. And so we were thinking that it might make just more sense to talk more about conversational AI from a developer angle in general and not so much only just about Rasa. And that's what ended up being or becoming the L3 AI conference that we had in June, which has been a huge success for us. We almost had 5,000 registered people and had speakers from all over the world, like the founder. I mean, you mentioned Spacey earlier, right? So Ines was there, the co-founder of Explosion AI, company behind Spacey. That was awesome. Then we had Adam Chamber, the founder of With and Siri, actually giving a keynote, and tons of other amazing people. And I think for us, the big lesson learned there was also that these online events really fit better into our mission overall in making all that stuff accessible to more people, because it's just almost impossible for folks to travel to SF if they are based in other continents, right? It's just really expensive and it's really far. And I think if anything, we'll double down on that online content, on that like online event content. Because I mean, as you probably know, we've invested a lot of time and effort into more like developer content on YouTube specifically.
Absolutely, Alex, agree with you. And the result of this, as we speak today for Rasa, the Rasa has been adopted by global communities. And as we speak, Rasa has over 3 million downloads, over 10K forum members, and over 450 active contributors. So with this, we want to do something fun with you, Alex. We have something that is called the rapid fire round. So let's start the rapid fire round for this particular podcast. Here's your first question. What is the best message you got from a community member? It can be personal or from a forum.
I just got my master's degree where I used Rasa in the master thesis. I think that's been really cool. And we got a lot of those messages.
What is the best message you got from clients who use Rasa?
The latest diet architecture just improved our accuracy by 10%, just switching one parameter in the config.yaml file.
What all contributors you know by their name and their country?
Yogesh, India. um, it's an easy one. Then Julian, Germany, and Nathan, Canada, and many more, but so many of them.
So here's another one. Micromanagement versus macro management. What do you prefer?
Macro management.
Early morning coder or late night coder?
Depends where I live. If I'm in Berlin, late night caller, and if I'm in SF, early morning.
Bootstrapped versus funding. What do you prefer?
Oh, that depends. I mean, both can be great, but of course, right now, funding.
Define Rasa in 3 or 5 words.
Making conversational AI accessible to everyone.
What is the best part which you have seen so far, and what's so special about it?
Lemonade, actually, the insurance company from the US. And I think what's so special about it is that they integrated it extremely well into their existing mobile app and just thought a lot about UX and how that all works for the user.
So with this, we come to the end of the rapid fire round.
Hey Alex, so I had another question like now. So with the chatbots and all of that thing, do you think chatbots can evolve to a place where you ask it some business insights and it produces some of those insights, does this analytics and provides you those answers? I've always wanted to hear if that can be possible to a scale.
It's a really good question. I mean, in the end, I think we've actually talked a lot about this in the last couple of months about the 5 levels of AI assistance that we just recently also updated. And the way how we look at it is that over time, pretty much the higher you get in those levels, the less you have to adopt to the assistant as a user, right? And so to give you an example, if you think about like a level 2 assistant, an FAQ assistant, you still have to know like what FAQs you can ask, but also in most cases, you still have to know like what information you need to provide in order to get an answer. And so if you get all the way to like level 5, this is not needed anymore, right? And back to your idea of can I get these like business insights through just talking to a conversational AI, I think that will be possible, but it will be only possible, we believe, if you connect the assistant to like other systems. And so in this case, if you think about like Looker as like a BI tool, for example, probably like a really experienced Looker user is able to get the insights in the questions that you just had about like how is my business going or something like that. They're probably able to get that information. But the reason why they're able to get it is because they understand what important metrics are for your business, but at the same time how to use the UI of Looker to get those pieces of information. What AI can do is like to really allow any user to become an expert for any piece of software without knowing how to use a tool. And I think that's really exciting, but it also would mean that it has to work with other tools and systems.
Absolutely, Alex. And also, obviously, when you're doing a lot of things will evolve as we go forward. Okay, I just wanted to ask some more questions just around Rasa. How did you come up with the name Rasa, and what is the current focus in terms of future for Rasa?
Sure. So the way we came up with the name was really that when we were working on Rasa NLU, or what became Rasa NLU, the internal name for this was Parsa, so parsing text. And when we thought about like, oh, we should really open sources, we felt like Parsa is kind of a weird name. And so we were looking for like alternatives, and then ended up seeing that Rasa.ai was available as a domain. And that just sounded like a cool name to us. But also I think in the context of like machine learning, it kind of makes sense because tabula rasa in Latin means like a blank slate. And so, of course, in machine learning, it all depends also on your training data. And so that was something that we just felt like makes a lot of sense. And I think people have appreciated it so far. I think what turns out is that in like a bunch of different Indian languages, it always means like something really good and like something, I think even king in one of them. And I think that's been funny, right? I mean, we did not know that at the beginning. In terms of like what's focused for us now, I would say it hasn't really changed much over the last 1 or 2 years for us. And so our focus is really like investing and spending a lot of time on product development and research. So that's something that we will be doing even more now with the funding that we just secured. And then the other big piece is really educating developers on building conversational AI. And that's a long journey, and we're really excited to see that the community is helping a lot with that. And it's just super cool to see like all the amazing efforts that have been going on. I mean, just to name one, of course, with the co-learning launch on YouTube, which I think is also something that you guys probably post here in the comments. It's just super cool to see that you guys have been doing such a phenomenal job there. And yeah, it's a lot of fun and long way to go.
Absolutely, Alex. We are excited to grow with Rasa. So for the audience here, Alex, some of them want to know personally certain things about you. So here's a light question for you. Do you watch any Indian movies? And if yes, do you have any favorite actor?
I don't, but I would love to start actually. If you can send me any recommendations, I'd love to check it out. I generally don't really watch a lot of movies and shows. I'm always really behind on like the latest Netflix shows and can't really talk much about that. But I'd love to check out some movies from India.
Awesome. So I guess Yogesh will send you some of the links. Okay.
Nice.
Okay. So last one, we know you're going on a vacation, and we just wanted to know what's your ideal vacation looking like.
I mean, one big piece is really just to entirely like switch off and not work, which is hard if you run a company like Rasa. But that's really important to me. And then the other big piece is really just being outside in nature and just having some like hiking or just in general being around nature.
Awesome. I've gone to a lot of hikes with my brothers here in India, and I can relate to the feeling. It's just so serene and clean.
Yeah.
Awesome. So with this, we come to the end of episode 1 of Rasa podcast series with Alex. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and bringing the Rasa community together and making it a better place for a lot of the contributors.
Yeah, thanks a lot for calling me for the podcast. I mean, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited that you guys are starting this and let us know how we can support further. Just for everyone listening, really make sure to subscribe to the co-learning launch on YouTube that I just mentioned and join the community there. As I said, they've been doing a fantastic job, and it's been really exciting to see our community grow across the globe, and make sure to check that out. Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.